Well, thank you, everyone, for tuning into our program today. You may know that Family Talk is a listener-supported program, and we remain on the air by your generosity, literally. If you can help us financially, we would certainly appreciate it. God's blessings to you all.
Today on Family Talk.
What does it mean to be unequally yoked? Now, the term originally referred to a pair of animals that couldn't work together to pull a plow. One animal may have been weaker or failed to listen to the farmer, which created problems. Well, today this concept indicates incompatibility or relatability in our relationships. This is Family Talk, part of the James Dobson Family Institute. I'm Roger Marsh with your host, popular author and child psychologist, Dr. James Dobson. Now, this topic of dating or being married to a non-believer is something that many couples struggle with. That's why we want you to hear from a husband and wife who experienced this tough journey together. In just a moment, you'll hear a classic conversation Dr. Dobson had with Lee and Leslie Strobel. Lee is an award-winning journalist, New York Times best-selling author, and noted Christian apologist. Together, he and his wife Leslie wrote a book called Surviving a Spiritual Mismatch in Marriage. Today, they'll share with Dr. Dobson how conflict arose in their marriage after Leslie became a Christian and Lee was not. Also, we'll see how that struggle impacted their individual approach to everyday life and parenting their children as well. Well, let's get to the first part of this discussion now with Dr. James Dobson right here on Family Talk.
Well, Lee and Leslie, I have the highest respect for you and what you do.
Same with me toward you.
One of the nation's best apologists of the Christian faith. And you do it in such a way that's captivating and winning to people. So I'm thankful for the way the Lord is using you, and it's such an honor, Leslie, to have you here.
Thank you so
much. I
much.
met you for the first time today, but it's extremely appropriate that you're here today because of the topic that we're here to talk about.
Thank you. We're grateful to be here.
You're a grandmother of
two. Two and one on the way.
Oh, my. That's not fair.
I know. It's wonderful.
How old are they?
Two little girls. One's 4 and one's 2.5.
And you guys are neighbors.
We are. We moved to Colorado, to Castle Rock, which is just between Denver and Colorado Springs, because my daughter and her husband and our grandchildren moved there, and we wanted to be in the same neighborhood. We wanted to be an influence in the lives of our grandchildren, and that was our motivation to be together. And fortunately, my son, who just got his Ph.D. in theology in Europe, has moved in with us temporarily while he waits for his position to open to teach theology. And his wife is pregnant, so we're going to have a baby in the house for the first time in 36 years.
Doesn't get any better than that.
A very pleasant time in your life.
Yeah, I'm catching up on my sleep right now. Storing it up.
We moved here from Southern California as well in 1991. Now, this is a great place to live,
It's
isn't
fabulous. We love it. Even though we moved in here in October, and the first week it snowed 24 inches. And we thought, what have we done? But then it was gone by the next day, and we thought, wait a minute. This is a secret that a lot of people don't know. They hear Colorado and they think, yeah, exactly. You don't want to spread this too far and wide. But it's a fantastic place to live.
Yeah. Well, it is particularly important that you be here because we're going to be talking about a very significant subject. Many years ago, an author named Joe Barry, that we talked about in my office a few minutes ago, had written an outstanding book called Beloved Unbeliever. I wouldn't be surprised if that book is still out there today.
I bet it is. Yeah,
but I interviewed her in 1983, and she went on to heaven shortly thereafter. So Joe is gone, but Lee and Leslie have walked the same bumpy road that Joe and her husband walked. And you all have written a book on this subject. It's called Surviving a Spiritual Mismatch in Marriage. And it's autobiographical, isn't it?
Yes.
It is.
Comes out of your early marital experience.
Yeah.
And when you all were married, neither of you were believers.
That's right. I was an atheist, pretty hardcore non-believer. Leslie was more I call it spiritual neutral. She was friendly toward the idea of God, but did not know God personally, was not a born-again Christian.
Where did you meet?
We met in high school. We happened to bump into each other. She was with a friend of mine, bumped into each other, and she went home that day and told her mom, I met the boy I'm going to marry.
That'll do it every time, right?
But then she was committed. She had to, and we did.
But neither of you grew up in a Christian home.
Well, my parents were Christians. They were members of a Lutheran church. They took me to church several times when I was younger, but they allowed me to decide what I wanted to follow, and I decided at a young age that God does not and cannot exist, and became a skeptic. And, which is, my personality. My background's in journalism and law, so you can imagine you put those two things together, what kind of a skeptic you get. And so I lived a life that was reflective of atheism. It was an immoral life. It was a drunken life. It was profane. It was narcissistic, self-centered, self-absorbed. I mean, that was who I was. Leslie was always the nice one.
Well,
were your parents believers?
my mother was raised in Scotland. She was from Scotland and was a war bride, was raised in the Scottish Presbyterian Church. And my father didn't want anything to do with church. She didn't drive, so consequently, she didn't go to church. She taught me about God. She used to sing hymns to me and read me Bible stories. But I never really knew who Jesus was other than the baby in the manger. There was never any kind of personal relationship with him.
The good news about her dad was, though, he did come to faith. I got to pray with him to receive Christ just literally hours before he had a stroke that debilitated him, and he lingered and eventually died. Mm-hmm. So it was really the last cogent conversation of his life at age 89 that he received Christ. And so thank God he's in heaven today. Right. But that was the world in which we came out.
All right, since we're going to be talking today about your marriage and the relationship as it relates to the Christian faith, what was your early marriage like? Did you bond together? Did it work? Or did you have problems?
It worked well until I became a Christian.
Right, that was the problem. We were pretty happy. I mean, yes, I would get drunk. I enjoyed getting drunk.
He was
I
a happy
drinking.
drunk.
I was a happy drunk. I was the friendliest guy in the bar. When I got drunk, I bought drinks for everybody. And but our relationship was good, wasn't it?
It was very good. But it was upon my accepting Christ that the trouble started.
What kind of trouble?
Well, he hadn't expected me to become a believer, and I hadn't expected to. I was in spiritual neutral, as Lee had mentioned, but we had just moved into a new apartment, and a neighbor came down with a plate of cookies, and her little girl, who was about the age of our daughter, and Linda was a Christian. And we struck up a really close relationship, and over time, she led me to the Lord. Which
I thought was the worst possible thing that could happen.
Yeah.
Honestly, when she told me, I'll never forget, she said, Lee, I've made a big decision. I've decided to become a follower of Jesus. And the first word that went through my mind was divorce.
It was
the first word that went through. I thought, I don't need this stuff. This is not what I signed up for. I don't need this. I don't want some holy roller for a wife. I don't want her putting curbs on my lifestyle. I don't want her looking down her nose at me when I get drunk. I don't want her dissing my friends because they're obnoxious people. That's what I thought was going to happen. And honestly, I remember I did something. This is how immature I was. I remember I was mowing the lawn later that day, and she had a beautiful flower garden, and I just mowed down the whole flower garden. I did, honestly.
Are you that kind of? Well, were you that kind of guy?
I was.
Well, Leslie, there are many things that happen in a Christian life where we're inclined to ask, what are you doing, Lord? Here you give your heart to Jesus, and the next thing you know, you're having marital problems.
You're so
That
right.
doesn't make any sense, but it was God's will for you guys.
That's right. And I don't know how I would have gotten through it without the support of Linda, who was a tremendous, godly woman, who wasn't just someone there to kind of help me gang up on Lee, but someone who was there to give me really wise, godly counsel on how to proceed and how to grow myself.
Yeah. Did you feel guilty or despondent because you were frustrating the man you loved?
over time, I felt guilty that he wasn't accepting Christ. I felt guilty that I wasn't somehow able to lead him to the Lord that I loved. And that's where the guilt came from, not so much my having become a believer.
Yeah, were you nagging him a
I did
lot?
go through a point of doing that. I'd leave tracts out or little books with underlined things for him to read, hopefully. And he would just close them and put them aside. And eventually, Linda really counseled me well on that and said, God doesn't need your help in trying to win Lee to the Lord. That's between God and Lee.
Did that turn you off, Lee?
It did initially, yeah. She would do those little things. She'd leave a book open with highlighted passages that she wanted me to read, and it made me mad. It frustrated me, but I overlooked it because there were a lot of emotions going on at the time. She was feeling bad because is there something wrong with me as a Christian that I can't lead my husband to Christ? Well, she was taking an unfair burden upon herself that she really shouldn't have. I was feeling all kinds of emotions because what was happening over time is it was almost as if her life were a mirror. And as she became more godly, as she lived a life of purity, as she pursued God in an authentic and transparent and honest way and grew in her faith, it was like she was holding a mirror up to me, and it was accentuating my sinfulness and my cynicism and just the corrosion of sin in my life. She wasn't doing it on purpose. She wasn't mocking me or she wasn't pointing her finger at me, but just her godly lifestyle, the contrast between that and my lifestyle was very convicting to me, and it made me mad. I was angry, and I don't know why. If you ask me, why are you so mad? I couldn't tell you, but that's what it was. And I remember one day I was talking to Leslie, and our little daughter was there, and she was talking about going to church. And I'm so full of rage. I remember I reared back and I just kicked a hole right through our living room wall, just out of raw anger over that. And she's crying and our daughter's crying. I mean, that was the depth of the frustration I felt because I didn't want to face the truth of who I was.
And yet her godly character is what drew you toward the Lord.
That's exactly right.
So two things were going on inside
Exactly.
of you.
I was resisting it, and it was convicting to me, and it was making me angry. And at the same time, though, all of the things I thought were going to happen negatively to Leslie and to our marriage didn't happen. And she became more loving and more committed to me and our children. And so it was winsome and it was attractive at the same time. So I remember one Sunday morning she said to me, Lee, why don't you go to church with me today? And I thought, you know what, I'm going to go and get her out of this cult that she's involved in. And I went and I heard a sermon by a guy we both know, Bill Hybels.
Yes.
And
Willow Creek.
At Willow Creek Church, which was meeting in a movie theater back then. And that was the moment, January the 20th of 1980, that I realized, even though I was still an atheist, if this was true, it had huge implications for my life. And that's when I decided to use my journalism training and legal training to investigate whether there's any credibility to Christianity. And that led me on this adventure of 1 year and 9 months of investigating the faith. And the whole time, of course, Leslie is going through this with me, and many times it was not a very pleasant experience.
Well, you were at that time the award-winning legal editor of the Chicago Tribune, and you had a master's degree in law from Yale Law School. So you were in a very secular world
you better
that you're
believe
in.
it. You better
and
believe
all of
it.
a sudden you're unequally yoked.
Exactly, and my marriage
to this
is
lady.
up in the air, and the conflict that came over things like, she would want to go to church on Sunday, and I didn't want to go with her. She wanted to give money to the church, and I blew up over that. She wanted to raise the children with Christian values, and I didn't care about that.
It changes everything, doesn't it?
Yes, there is no part of marriage that it doesn't affect.
Leslie, what about the children? How were you dealing with the fact that their father didn't know or love God, and you were trying to teach them that He is everything?
Right. Fortunately, Kyle was much younger, but Allison still was young enough to where it really it wasn't something she'd articulate. But she would wonder why Daddy wasn't going to church with us. And sometimes I struggled with how to even answer that. But eventually I just said, you know what? You and I and Kyle are going to go to church. Daddy's had a hard week at work, and he just doesn't feel like he can. We feel differently about church, and that's okay.
So you tried to cover for him.
I kind of covered for him. Eventually, it got a little harder as they got a bit older. But I don't know that it ever became a big enough problem because they still were so young.
How many years did this go on?
Only 2, and it felt much longer at the time. But thanks to God, it was only 2 years.
You do realize we're talking to many people
know.
who are right there
Yes,
now.
I do.
And some of them never really quite got past it.
Yeah.
My grandmother and grandfather were like that. My grandfather was an incredibly moral man. His handshake, as it was in those days, was his bond. But he didn't want anything to do with the church. He saw hypocrisy there, and he took a look at it and said, that's not for me. And he said to my grandmother, who was deeply committed to Christ, that you can do what you do, just don't involve me in it. And they had 6 children. My father was one of them. And my little grandmother weighed 97 pounds, would pack up those 6 kids to get them to church. Wow. She would gather them around and pray for them and pray with them and say, if I lose one of you, it would have been better that I had never been born. That's the way she saw her task. But her husband would have none of it.
Yeah.
And he was a strong man. He was a 6'5". He was just a powerful man. And she began praying for him, and she prayed for him for 40 years.
Yeah.
She fasted weekends. She prayed for him, and he never moved. Now, I don't want to take too much of our time here, but I have to tell you what happened.
That is so powerful because, when Leslie says 2 years for us, and it felt like an eternity in our lives. And yet there are people who will go their whole life and their spouse will never come to faith.
That's right, and that's discouraging.
It's very discouraging.
But it can also result in a wonderful conversion, and that's what happened to my grandfather. He had a stroke when he was 69 years of age, and then had another one, and he was very, very ill. And his daughter, who was grown by then, was upstairs trying to help him, arranging his medication, taking care of him. And she looked at him, and he was crying. And no one had ever seen him shed a tear before. And she ran over to him, and she knelt down, and she said, "Daddy, what's wrong?" And he said, "Honey, go get your mother." And so she went running down the stairs to get my grandmother, who came running to his side. And she knelt by his side and said, "Tell me what's wrong." And he said, "I know I'm going to die. And it's okay. I'm not afraid to die. But it is so dark. Will you pray for me?" She had been asking him if she could pray for him for 40 long years, and he gave his heart to the Lord. And he died 2 weeks later with a testimony on his lips. I say that to give hope to all those people who have waited and waited and waited. And the Lord seems not to be paying attention. But he was hearing all that time.
And, I think one encouragement for people who are in that situation is to realize that, you can have, even though your spouse is not a believer, you can have a Christian marriage to the degree to which you are willing to live out Christian values. So in other words, Leslie, I wasn't a believer, and yet Leslie tried to create as best she could a Christian home. And she pursued honesty and integrity, and she pursued God, and the degree to which I allow that to happen is a degree to which she was able to flourish in her relationship with Christ and create for her and the children a semblance of a Christian home, even though it wasn't truly because I was not a believer.
Lee, knowing what you know about the Christian faith today, isn't it amazing to you that God wanted you when you didn't want him?
Yeah, exactly. I think, God didn't give me what I deserved. He gave me grace, and that's what I got from Leslie. And that was one of the things she did that really won me over in the long haul was that God did not give me what I deserved, which was an eternity separated from Him in hell. I mean, that's what I deserved. And yet He gave me love, and He gave me grace, and He drew me to Himself over time. And, Leslie did not give me what I deserved when I would come home drunk. She didn't give me what I deserved when I would let loose with a string of expletives. She gave me love. She gave me grace. Those times when the marriage was at its most tense and when I thought, I'm going to get out of here, those were the times when she would reach out to me physically, and she would put her arm around me, and she would reconnect with me.
But I look back on that time, and I can see God's hand, because I was doing, when Lee talks about how in the midst of a difficult time I would reach out when he felt like walking out, that was not Leslie coming. That was the Holy Spirit working through me, because I had been praying. I wouldn't know what to do. My natural inclination would be to lash out. That's what I would normally do. But I would sense in my spirit not to do that. Psalm 4:4 was my mantra, which was, do not sin in your anger. And that just always would come to mind, because I was angry. I was very upset. I couldn't understand why someone so intelligent and who was so open to so many ideas somehow closed his mind off to the whole idea of Christianity. I couldn't understand why he wouldn't even talk about it or listen to it or go check it out for himself. And so even though I felt angry, I would sense that I needed to just reach out. I remember one time we'd had a blow up. I don't even remember what it was about. But I was at the sink doing dishes, and he was in the other room, and I just knew God was saying, stop doing the dishes, go in there and just sit with him and tell him you love him. And I didn't want to. I mean, it was the last thing I wanted to do, and I told God that. But I knew I had to do it to be obedient, and I thought, okay. And we were sort of in that stalemate where no one's talking and it's just icy. But I went in, I sat down, and I just put my arm around him and just said, you know what? I don't want to fight about this stuff. I love you. And that just sort of broke the ice, and it melted and diffused the whole situation so that we kind of laughed about it in the end. And that happened over and over again. God was so good to give me eyes to see times when I needed to not be who I normally am in the flesh, but to rise above it. And I believe the Christian in the relationship has to do that. You are the one with the wisdom.
Lee and Leslie Strobel, it's so good to have you here.
Thanks so much.
There are times when we are talking about a subject thinking you can just feel the message going out through these microphones and out into homes and cars where you're touching the lives of people. I mean, this is such a common problem. The church is filled with people, and especially women, but sometimes men, who do not have a spouse that shares the most important dimension of their lives. And you all have taken us there. And tomorrow you're going to take us home with it, okay?
Great.
Thank you for being our
Thank
guest.
you. Our pleasure.
Well, what an uplifting broadcast today here on Family Talk. I'm Roger Marsh. So glad you tuned in for this broadcast. And to echo what Dr. Dobson just said, for those in a relationship with an unbeliever, you are not alone. Many couples struggle with this exact same situation. So find community and encouragement from others who are or have walked this journey. I also urge you to look into the Strobels' book on this topic titled Spiritual Mismatch. You can find a link for that book on today's broadcast page at drjamesdobson.org. Once you've visited our website, be sure to also check us out on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and Instagram. You'll find our accounts simply by searching for Dr. James Dobson's Family Talk. Once you follow our profiles, you'll have access to all of our godly and uplifting content. You can listen to past broadcasts, read Dr. Dobson's newsletter, or just enjoy the articles we posted there. We want to support your family and grow your walk with the Lord. So the next time you're bogged down by the spam of social media, take a break with Dr. James Dobson's Family Talk. Search for us online at Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and Instagram. You'll be glad you did. Finally, I want to thank you for your faithful financial support of the ministry of Family Talk. We would not survive without your generous financial contributions. You can learn more about standing with us here in 2019 by visiting our website at drjamesdobson.org or calling 877-732-6825. Be sure to join us again tomorrow as we continue Dr. Dobson's compelling conversation with Lee and Leslie Strobel. That's coming up next time right here on Family Talk. Have a blessed day.
This has been a presentation of the Dr. James Dobson Family Institute.
Hey everyone, this is Dr. Tim Glinton with the James Dobson Family Institute. You want a quick and easy way to listen to Family Talk? Well, hey, we're excited to tell you how you can catch our daily broadcast on Amazon Alexa. That's right, Amazon Alexa. This hands-free smart device allows you to hear myself and Dr. Dobson while you go around your daily routine. Once you enable the Family Talk skill, say, Alexa, play today's broadcast of Family Talk. It's as effortless as that. Learn how you can set up Family Talk on your Amazon Alexa by visiting drjamesdobson.org/Alexa. That's drjamesdobson.org/Alexa.